IRD-1
and the officials are waiting to welcome the Russian president whose flight has just landed in Alaska for the high-stakes summit with the U.S. President Donald Trump. Ahead of leaving for Alaska, Putin had clearly said that he had appreciated the U.S. efforts in ending the war in Ukraine and had called Trump's efforts sincere and vigorous at this point of time. But we are getting you live visuals from Alaska, where Russian president's plane has just landed in Alaska ahead of the high-stakes Trump-Putin meeting, where, of course, the agenda and the focus will be on ending the war in Ukraine. A short while ago, the Kremlin had also clearly said that the meeting between Trump and Putin will last for 6 to 7 hours. And we also know that the U.S. President Donald Trump will be meeting the Russian president at his plane once he lands. And we have visuals now coming that the Russian president's plane has landed in Alaska ahead of the high-stakes summit. Well, earlier, Trump also said that if there's no deal secured with Russia, he will walk away immediately and he will go home real fast. A lot of contours to unpack here. But what we are getting you right now is that Russian President Vladimir Putin's plane has landed in Alaska, and Trump will be meeting Putin at his plane in just a short while from now. Ahead of leaving for Alaska, Putin had clearly called the summit and the efforts made by U.S. President Donald Trump sincere and vigorous, as we can see, officials and military personnel lining up, waiting for the Russian President Vladimir Putin to get off his plane, as a red carpet welcome awaits for the Russian president. But ahead of that, Trump has clearly issued a big warning to Putin, saying that he will walk away if there's no deal secured on Ukraine and the war that's going on in Ukraine for almost 3.5 years now. And we're getting you live visuals from Alaska. The stage is set. The Alaska 2025 high-stakes summit. The red carpet has been rolled out for the Russian President Vladimir Putin, whose plane has just landed in Alaska. In a short while from now, the Russian president will be meeting U.S. President Donald Trump, who clearly said that he will be meeting Putin at his plane before the high-stakes summit. Of course, a lot of chemistry and dynamics to be noted between both the leaders. And for more on this, our correspondent, Susan Terani, is joining us on the phone line. Susan, get us up to speed with what you're learning. The Russian president has just landed in Alaska. His plane has touched down in Alaska. Red carpet welcome there. And the U.S. President Donald Trump said that he will be meeting Putin at his plane before the high-stakes summit.
That's right. That is what we're hearing. And that was from the Russians, who said that President Trump will be meeting him on his plane, giving this red carpet welcome that we're seeing. What a sight to see. We are expected to also see Air Force One land shortly. This is a meeting that's very important to both leaders. For Putin, it gives him credibility and sort of shatters that myth that he's isolated somewhere away from the international community, being welcomed in Alaska, somewhere that has a lot of history on this military base, a history of World War II during the Cold War. Parts of Russia, an island is still controlled by Russia, part of Alaska. So it's very symbolic. It's important for Russia on that side. And then it's also, of course, important for President Trump, who's really, despite the fact that he continuously says that this is not my war, it was Biden's war, he's really trying to make an effort to stop it and reach some kind of ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia on the world stage. This is his test to appear as the master deal maker that he has been portraying himself as to be. And also, of course, the Ukrainians are watching very closely, despite the fact that the president said that he's not going to be negotiating on the part of Ukraine. But they're going to be watching to see if there's going to be any American incentives given to Russia during this meeting. Remember, this is as much about Ukraine as it is about bilateral relations between the two sides, Russia and the United States. Both sides do hope that some kind of strategic partnership is going to come out of this. And also, of course, other countries who have been sort of scapegoated because of sanctions and tariffs, but doing business with Russia, India included, they're going to be watching very closely as well. China, of course, is watching. Turkey as well, who buys Russia oil. So far, it has, hasn't been punished. But President Trump made very clear that if Vladimir Putin is not serious about this ceasefire, he's going to be facing very severe consequences. Now, whether or not that's more sanctions, more tariffs on third countries, he didn't really mention. But nonetheless, the stakes are very high, despite the fact that the president has tried to downplay them, saying that this is just a preliminary meeting to a bigger meeting between himself, possibly Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky.
Right, Susan, now just coming to that, of course, a lot of back and forth going on from the U.S. President Donald Trump's side. And just a short while ago, before he meets the Russian president, he clearly said in candid words that because Donald Trump calls himself a deal maker, he says if a deal is not reached, if there's no ceasefire, he would walk away, further asserting that nothing's set in stone.
Yeah, that's right. Like just managing expectations, because he's admitted that he thinks sometimes he thought that he was having very good conversations with Vladimir Putin. And then he would see that, Russia would start bombarding parts of Ukraine and just continuing with its war against Ukraine. And then on the other side as well, who can forget that meeting he had with Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House? While his tone has changed since then regarding Ukraine, his tone has changed regarding Russia. He changes his tones regarding the two countries, but nonetheless, it appears that this is what he wants. Now, he said that he had enough incentive to meet with the Russians and meet with Vladimir Putin face to face after his envoy Steve Witkoff was in Russia and held discussions with Putin, and also with the foreign minister Sergei Lavrov as well, and said that the messages that he brought back after that meeting just a few weeks ago really provided an opportunity for the United States to sit at the negotiating table with Russia. But again, nonetheless, he's been here before. He knows he's been here before. He knows the stakes are high and how much expectation is pinned to this meeting. And despite the fact that he's trying to manage those expectations, just one cannot deny how important it is and how many eyes are on this meeting to see, which way it'll go and which way it'll sway. I just want to say very quickly, just a sign that we're all going to be finding out together how this meeting goes. President Trump said that he was going to have a joint press conference afterwards with Vladimir Putin. He said afterwards, the White House relayed messages that if that meeting doesn't go well between the two leaders, President Trump is not going to hold that joint press conference. He's going to have a solo press conference.
Right, Susan, just to follow up on that, do you think that Trump is already setting the bar pretty low at this point of time? Because yesterday he said that 25% chance of failure. Earlier he said that the goal of the meeting was to get Putin to the table. And now he's saying that if there's no deal reached, he would walk away.
Yeah, I think that because he keeps being asked the same questions over and over again, understandably, as journalists and reporters, we understand that. I think his message has been pretty clear throughout. I do think that his tone has really changed when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. That goes back and forth, sort of making each side the lesser evil during his talks and the comments that he makes. But ultimately, I think he's been pretty clear to say that, this is sort of a time where if Russia is serious, they have to really show it in this bilateral meeting. And if it's not, then he's going to walk away and just go on with those sanctions, tariffs, and the other measures that America believes it has in its toolbox. In that sense, I think it's clear that he doesn't want to embarrass himself. He doesn't want to embarrass the United States. And he just sort of is saying, this is where we stand right now. But I also really do think that he has some kind of agreement with Putin's side that something is going to come out of this meeting. I mean, it would be very bizarre if the two sides just sort of went their separate ways. There has to have been some kind of prelude, some kind of agreement reached, at least informally, that the two sides decided to meet. Now, devil's in the detail, as we always say, but it appears that they both want to get something out of this. Now, whether or not that's going to be enough to satisfy everyone that this meeting was successful, again, that's yet to be seen.
Right, Susan, because the question in everybody's mind right now is that what will the U.S. president actually give to Russia at this point of time for Russia to stop the war in Ukraine? Because we've seen that the sanctions are clearly not working out in Russia, because Russia has somehow found a loophole to work for its economy to flourish with heavy sanctions from the West.
Yeah, that's very true. And there are talks that somehow there may be some kind of incentives, economic incentives, trade incentives that perhaps the United States may be offering Russia. Remember, that's also very important for Vladimir Putin to go home and say, I went over there and I got these trade and economic incentives from the United States. Coming back, there is sort of this green light about doing business not only directly with the United States, but also maybe open Russia to the international community in some way. So he has some kind of win going back home to tell his people. But on the other hand, you know, it's just, we've talked about sanctions time and again. As you rightly mentioned, sanctions haven't really been working. They are hurting the Russian economy to a certain extent, but it's not enough to stop Putin from, you know, continuing with this war. There are so many other countries that are doing business with Russia right now, and Russia believes that it can sustain it and grab these lands by force. So the question of sanctions has always been, you know, a big question mark. How effective are sanctions, not only against Russia, but against other countries, and how far do they have to go to be effective? But I think that if there is sort of this carrot, I think the White House is trying to present this carrot and stick policy where it offers some incentives, not necessarily on the part of Ukraine or Europeans, but trade with the United States directly, then that might signal that it might be worthwhile for Putin to take it into consideration. But, you know, unless land is involved ultimately when it comes to Ukraine, it's very hard to imagine that Russia is going to just go along with just pulling all of its forces out of Ukraine and everything is going to be normal business as usual.
Right, Susan, because a few days ago, Trump clearly said that land swapping is on the table between Ukraine and Russia. I also want to talk to you about the fact that the Kremlin just an hour ago said that the meeting between Trump and Putin will last for 6 to 7 hours. And this is more longer than the previous summit in Helsinki, which lasted for about 2 hours. So get us up to speed and talk to us more about, will it just be the Ukraine issue which will be on the table, or perhaps both the leaders will try to thwart ties, and where perhaps U.S. and Russia relations move forward after this meeting?
Yeah, those are two very, very important aspects of it. Like I mentioned, you know, Ukraine is just one part of this. We see that Vladimir Putin has brought his trade team, his economic team with him. This really signals that he's open to some kind of cooperation with the United States on a bilateral level. And also, you know, we talk about symbolism, just the fact that they're in Alaska right now, that is really you know, symbolic in many ways, considering the fact that it's very far away from not only Ukraine, but from Europe. And that itself, you know, presents a opportunity, at least from the optics of it, that these two sides may be able to reach something on their own and then present it to the rest of the world, which is Europe and Ukraine. But Vladimir Putin knows that President Trump is very keen on trade deals. He's a businessman. And I think bringing that trade team along with him signals that he's also open to do business, and it's going to be to Russia's benefit. But again, at what cost? What is Russia willing to give up? How is it going to back out? How is it going to back down? You know, what about the territories? I know we talk about giving territories. That's one aspect of it, you know, to Ukraine, from Ukraine to Russia. But then Russia has had other demands. It talks about the denazification of Ukraine, and the denazification of Ukraine starts with Vladimir Zelensky seizing power, basically, and not being the Ukrainian president. I mean, those are things that it's hard to imagine that Ukrainians would agree to. And then on the other hand, you know, Ukraine really wants to be part of NATO. We already know that that's not probably going to happen. Europe has been dragging its feet regarding putting Ukraine as part of NATO anyway. But there has to be some security guarantees for the Ukrainians as well. How much is Russia going to be open to maybe Ukraine joining the European Union, or if there's going to be some kind of European forces, peacekeeping forces in Ukraine during that span of ceasefire? So yes, there's a lot of details to figure out regarding Ukraine. But for the United States, and I know President Trump sort of downplayed the rare mineral deal, but there was this offer and there was talks that the United States may offer rare earth minerals from Alaska, not necessarily Ukraine, but from Alaska as well to the Russians. So it appears they have this incentive package that they're willing to present to Putin, and Putin in turn apparently is willing to take those into consideration when it thinks about what it wants to do in Ukraine. So yes, bilateral talks and relations are not only detrimental to what happens in Ukraine, but it's also very important for the relations between the two sides, Russia and the United States, moving forward as well.
Right, Susan, thanks for getting us the latest. We'll, of course, be closely tracking as the Russian president has already landed in Alaska, the high-stakes summit between Trump and Putin.